Joe Johnson made the case for another vote, not a second referendum, he told Nick just a few moments ago, not a second referendum, but a first referendum on the reality of the deal that we have been able to achieve. Let us talk to Jacob Rees Mogg, MP for North East Somerset, chair of the European Research Group of MPs, of Conservative MPs. Morning to you.
Hello, good morning.
Could we start with that last point from Joe Johnson? He made it very strongly. He said another vote would not be a second referendum, it would be a first referendum on the reality of the deal.
Well, that's clearly untrue. It would be a second referendum on whether or not to leave the European Union, and he made that quite clear. And his answer to the manifesto question, the manifesto he wrote, which said that the referendum result would be delivered, as indeed did both the Leave and the Remain campaigns and Downing Street and the opposition during the referendum campaign, was, I thought, the least strong of all his answers.
But the point that he was making is that we were told about a world that we could inhabit post-Brexit. We now see the reality of the one that the Prime Minister envisages us inhabiting, and they are two very different things. And it's perfectly reasonable to go to people and say, are you sure this is what you want?
Well, I think he has made a great leap, actually, that he makes a very good criticism of the government's negotiating strategy, and that the government has decided to offer us a state of vassalage. Now, that the government has negotiated incompetently does not mean you should reverse the result of the referendum. It means that you should look at getting a better deal. And this fear of leaving on WTO terms is hugely overstated. We trade more than 50% of our trade on WTO terms. It's how business is done across the world.
Yeah, but we don't do it through Calais, do we? That's the point.
Well, we do it through Southampton, and there are 6-second delays on goods coming in via Southampton.
Yeah, but through containers in a very different set of situations, set of circumstances.
It can be done extraordinarily efficiently if you've got the right systems in place. And I accept the right systems aren't yet there. But what you're basically saying is the government has failed to negotiate, and therefore the result of the referendum, the biggest democratic result in our nation's history, should be overturned. This doesn't seem to me to be the right answer at all. This is reheating Project Fear to stop us leaving on the 29th of March, which is what people voted for.
On no deal, he says, as of course Transport Minister until he resigned, an insider, someone who's seen the plans, the government may have to take control, he says, of prioritising which lorries, which goods are allowed in and out of the country. An extraordinary and unworkable intervention for a government in an advanced capitalist economy. Then Kent becoming a lorry park, etc., etc. He has seen these plans, and all he's saying is, well, if this is what comes to pass, surely people should have a vote first.
Well, you use the word if, which is a crucial and important word, that it is right for the government to prepare for the worst possible outcome. And there has always been a risk that, had you listened to my collected speeches during the referendum campaign, you would have heard me refer to, but I doubt you did. You probably have better things to do. There's always been a risk that the EU decides upon a punishment Brexit, which makes life very difficult for us immediately when we leave. That has always been a risk, and it was a risk inherent in the vote to leave, and it was a risk that was highlighted during the referendum campaign by the Remain side, who constantly tried to frighten us into voting to remain in the European Union. And yes, of course the government is making plans for things that may go wrong. That does not mean that they will go wrong.
But he is, I mean, again, I come back to the fact that he is an insider. He has seen not just these plans, he thinks that they would happen in the event of no deal. Are you saying for certain that they wouldn't?
George Osborne was the ultimate insider when he said we would have a punishment Brexit. Lots of terrible scares that have been raised have not come to pass. We're dealing with civilized nations. We are dealing with allies with whom we have a whole range of other interests. We know that the Mayor of Calais has said that he does not want Calais to be massively disrupted when the UK leaves. There are other interests in this beyond the punishment Brexit that Mr. Johnson is suggesting may happen. But of course the government is right to make preparations. But when the government says, or when a former minister says, these are the preparations for the worst that may happen, that is not a statement that those things will happen.
What do you make of the parliamentary arithmetic now? Because, of course, I mean, I left that question to last because it, in a sense, it just drives people mad and nobody can quite know. But it is, of course, hugely, hugely important because it will govern, if there is a deal brought back to the Commons, what happens.
Well, it's been clear, I think, for some time that the government can only possibly get a deal through if it has the support of the Labour Party, and not just a few rebels in the Labour Party, but either the wholesale abstention of the Labour Party or its active support. There will not be enough support on the Conservative benches to get this through.
And in those circumstances, what happens?
Well, the clerk of the House of Commons, very distinguished clerk, Sir David Nartzler, explained to the Brexit Select Committee that Parliament has legislated for what happens. Parliament legislated, and Mr Johnson was part of this, for us to leave on the 29th of March. That is in the Withdrawal Act, and it was in the Act allowing for the exercising of Article 50. So that is what happens if Parliament does not agree to the Prime Minister's deal. But the Prime Minister should still try and get a better deal. The EU has offered us Super Canada from the very beginning, pretty much. It's been offered by Donald Tusk, it's offered by Monsieur Barnier, it's offered for the whole UK, and the government needs to move towards that, something that would be in everybody's interest and would deliver a deal that would smooth the edges of our departure.
Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you.